Hi there, thanks for joining me here on JKD Handmade, where I'll be showing you how to make this crochet cardigan. It's worked in panels and the pattern is for sizes from child 2 years to adult 5XL. I'm using a double knit category 3 light worsted in a multi-tone and solid color. This is 100% acrylic and the recommended hook is a 4mm hook. I used approximately 750 grams for a size medium. Remember, it also depends on the length. You'll also need a measuring tape, stitch markers, a pair of scissors, a yarn or wool needle, and then for your hooks, for most of the sweater, you will use a 5mm hook, and then for the ribbings, we'll use a 4mm hook. I'll be making a size medium for this tutorial, but you can follow along for the other sizes. Okay, so let's get on with the tutorial. We'll work the back panel using the 5mm hook. Form a slip knot. So for our first round, we'll work a foundation double crochet. Chain 2. So that's 1 and 2. Into the first chain, work a double crochet. So that's yarn over, insert your hook into that first chain, pull up a loop. You have 3 loops on your hook. Yarn over and go through 1 loop on the hook. Now you'll see that we formed a little chain, and that chain will be the start of our next stitch. So I just place my finger on that chain to guide me along. Then it's yarn over, go through 2 loops on the hook, yarn over, go through 2 loops on the hook. We have formed our first stitch. Yarn over and into that chain, going through both loops from that chain, insert your hook, pull up a loop. You have 3 loops on your hook, yarn over and go through 1 loop on the hook. And again, we formed the next chain, the start of our next stitch. Yarn over, go through 2 loops on the hook, yarn over, go through 2 loops on the hook. We've now formed our second stitch. Yarn over, insert your hook into that chain, going into both the loops from that chain, pull up a loop, yarn over and go through only 1 loop on the hook, forming the little chain, the start of our next stitch. Yarn over, go through 2 loops on the hook, yarn over, go through 2 loops on the hook. We formed our third stitch. So you'll continue on repeating this to form your foundation double crochet, and that's round 1 of this back panel. Now this foundation double crochet round determines the length of the cardigan. So you'll work as many stitches as need be to get to the length of your cardigan. So that's from the shoulder to, it could be to the hip, or you could make it shorter to the waist, or even below the hip, that's fine. Okay, so I've continued on, but you'll see that my foundation round is a lot shorter than yours because this is just a sample. Now for my actual cardigan, I had worked 64 stitches. Round 2, chain 2 and turn. Chain 2 counts as our first stitch. We will be working the herringbone double crochet. So that's yarn over, insert your hook into the next stitch, pull up a loop, take that loop and pull it through the first loop on your hook, yarn over and go through 1 loop on the hook, yarn over, go through 2 loops on the hook. Again, it's yarn over, insert your hook into the stitch, pull up a loop, take that loop and pull it through the first loop on your hook, yarn over and go through 1 loop on the hook, yarn over, go through 2 loops on the hook. Continue on with the herringbone double crochet to the end of the round. Okay, so going back to that foundation double crochet round, so you would physically take that foundation double crochet round and hold it from the shoulder going downwards, and you'd see what length you'd want your cardigan at. Okay, so now I've continued on and I've completed round 2, round 3, chain 2 and turn. Again, we're working the herringbone double crochet into all stitches. Continue to the end of the round. So here I am nearing the end of round 3. Now remember that we had started off the previous round on a chain 2. So your last stitch must be worked into the second chain from chain 2. And that's the stitch pattern for the back panel. It's just a repeat of round 2. So that's chain 2 and turn, and then it's the herringbone double crochet into all stitches. Here are the shoulder to shoulder measurements for the different sizes. Use the measurement for the size that you are working on. You may pause the video to jot down the measurement. You will need these measurements for the width of your back panel. I've continued on to complete my back panel as you see here. All I've done was repeat round 2. So if you look at the back panel, here's the length of the panel, and along the side is the width of the panel. So the width of your back panel must measure the shoulder to shoulder measurement for the size that you are working plus 3 inches. I'm working a size medium, so that's 16 inches plus 3 inches gives me 19 inches. So that's 3 inches, or if you're working in centimeters, that would be 7.5 centimeters. So you would add that measurement to the shoulder to shoulder measurement for the size that you are working. You can then fasten off and cut off the excess yarn. We now need to mark off the neckline on the back panel. Fold the back panel in half along the length of this panel, and from that folded edge, mark off 2 inches. So that's 2 inches or 5 centimeters. Using stitch markers, mark off both layers. Once open, the full neckline measures 4 inches or 10 centimeters. So here we have the neckline at the center, and on either of the sides we have the shoulders. We will now work shoulder 1 on the back panel. I'll be using my solid color for this part of the back panel. And remember, we're sticking with the 5mm hook. Now there are no actual stitches to work with. We will work all our stitches into the little gaps along that top edge. So bring in your yarn and attach it at that edge. Chain 2. Chain 2 counts as our first stitch. Right next to the chain 2, work a double crochet. So that's yarn over, insert your hook into a little gap, pull up a loop, yarn over, go through 2 loops on the hook, yarn over, go through 2 loops on the hook. Then you leave a space that's the width of 2 stitches and work a double crochet leaving that little space as I have done here. So you need to go back into the space that was left, and that's where we'll work a puff stitch. So it's yarn over, insert your hook into that skip space, pull up a loop, elongate the loop, yarn over, insert your hook into that same space, pull up a loop, elongate the loop, yarn over, insert your hook into that same space, pull up a loop, elongate the loop, yarn over, insert your hook into that same space, pull up a loop, elongate the loop, yarn over and go through all those loops on the hook. Then chain 1 to secure. Now you'll skip 2 spaces. Well, actually it's the width of 2 stitches and work a double crochet as I have done here. Into the skip space, work a puff stitch. Again, it's yarn over, insert your hook into that skip space, pull up a loop, elongate the loop, yarn over, insert your hook into that skip space, pull up a loop, elongate the loop, yarn over, insert your hook into that skip space, pull up a loop and elongate the loop, yarn over, insert your hook into that skip space, pull up a loop and elongate the loop, yarn over and go through all the loops on the hook, and it's a chain 1 to secure. So that was a puff stitch, and remember you pulling up loops 4 times to create this puff stitch. Then again you'll skip a space that's the width of 2 stitches and work a double crochet. You go back into the skipped space and work a puff stitch. Continue on with the stitch pattern until you get to the stitch marker. I've worked my way to just before the stitch marker. Now you will need to gauge how many more of these puff stitches you can work. Right at the end, before reaching that stitch marker, you would need to work 2 double crochets to complete the round. So here you see I can work in 1 more puff stitch, and I still have space to work 2 double crochets. So into that space just before the stitch marker, I'll work a double crochet, and right into the stitch marker, or the space marked by the stitch marker, I'll work my last stitch, which is a double crochet. So that's round 1 of shoulder 1, round 2, chain 2 and turn. Work a double crochet into the next stitch. Skip 2 stitches. So if you look above the puff stitch, there's 3 stitches. You'll skip the first 2. Into the 3rd stitch, work a double crochet. Go back into that 2nd skip stitch and work a puff stitch. So the stitch pattern here is skip 2 stitches, then it's a double crochet, go back into the skip stitch and work a puff stitch. Remember to chain 1 after working the puff stitch to secure that stitch. So you'll continue on with the stitch pattern to the end of the round. At the end of that round, work 2 double crochets into the last 2 stitches. You can then fasten off and cut off the excess yarn. We've completed shoulder 1. I left behind a long enough tail to help with the seaming. We'll work shoulder 2, attach yarn to the space marked by the second stitch marker. Okay, so I've worked shoulder 2 in exactly the same way as I did shoulder 1. We'll use the back panel as a guide when working the front panel. Here I've got shoulder 1 and 2 complete. I'll set that aside, and I've already worked a portion of my front panel. So the front panel, you'll begin with your foundation double crochet in the same way that you had for the back panel, only this time your foundation double crochet must be 3 stitches shorter than that of the back panel. So for my back panel, I worked 64 stitches. For my front panel, I only worked 61 stitches. Then repeat round 2 until this portion of the front panel measures 2 to 3 inches or 5 to 7 centimeters in width. Right at the bottom edge, attach yarn by bringing in your change of color. Chain 2. So that's 1, 2. Skip the next 2 stitches, and into that next stitch, work a double crochet. Go back into the skipped stitch. That's the second skip stitch, and work a puff stitch. Remember to chain 1 to secure the stitch. Skip 2 stitches, into the next stitch work a double crochet. Go back into the second skipped stitch and work a puff stitch. And you'll continue on with the stitch pattern to the end of the round. I've continued on with this puff stitch pattern, and here I am at the end of the round. Now I have a space left, so I've only worked as many puff stitches as I could fit in. And here I have a space left. I've got about 3 stitches, so yes, I could work one more puff stitch pattern, but I'd like to end on double crochets. So with 3 stitches remaining, I'll skip 1 and I'll work 2 double crochets to end that round. If you have just 1 stitch remaining, you'll work 1 double crochet. If you have 2 stitches remaining, you'll skip 1 stitch and work a double crochet to complete the round. So for my next round, it's chain 2, turn, and then I'll work a double crochet into the next stitch, skip 2 stitches above the puff stitch, into the third stitch work a double crochet, go back into the skipped stitch and work a puff stitch. So that's my stitch pattern for this round. It's skip 2 stitches, a double crochet into the next round, go back into the second skip stitch, work a puff stitch. Remember to work that chain 1 to secure the puff stitch. Continue to the end of the round. Here I am at the end of the round. Into my last stitch, I'll work a double crochet to end this round. For the next round, chain 2 and turn. So for this round, we're working the herringbone double crochet into all stitches. Continue on to the end of the round. So here I am, I've continued on and I've worked a few rounds of the herringbone double crochet. So it was just a repeat of chain 2, turn, and it's the herringbone stitch into all stitches. Now at this point, I'll bring in my back panel and we'll use that back panel as a guide to get the width of our front panel correct. Place your front panel on top of the back panel, aligning the sides and bottom edge well, as I have done here. Now you see that the front panel, or rather the width of the front panel, is slightly shorter than the width of the shoulder portion of the back panel. Now, we still need to work the puff stitch detail along this edge of the front panel. So I'll go ahead and measure that detail for you just to give you an idea, and it's around 1.5 inches or 4 centimeters. So I've worked my front panel 1.5 inches shorter than that of the width of the shoulder portion of the back panel. So to bring it up to the right width, I need to work that puff stitch detail. So now that we have the width correct, let's go ahead and complete this front panel. Chain 2, and now we're just following the same stitch pattern as we had from the puff stitch detail for our rounds that we worked before. So it's double crochet, as many double crochets as you had worked before, then it's skip 2 stitches and it's the puff stitch into the skip stitch, and so on until you complete the front panel. So you'll need to work 2 rounds of the puff stitch detail. I've completed those 2 rounds and I've placed my front panel on top of the back panel, as you see here. So at this point, you'll see that my front panel aligns with the shoulder portion of my back panel. Once you have the width of your front panel aligning with the shoulder portion of the back panel, we need to pick up on the length of this panel. So we'll just continue on and we'll work along the top edge of the front panel. Continuing on along the top edge of the front panel, chain 2, and there are no stitches to work with. We need to work our stitches into the little spaces or gaps along that top edge. So here's a closer view, and those are the little spaces and gaps. Into a space nearby, work a double crochet. Then again, we're skipping a space that's the width of 2 stitches. You may need to help the stitches get into the gaps. So you'll work a double crochet and go back into the second skip space, work a puff stitch. So your pattern is the same. You'll skip 2 spaces, a double crochet, go back into the skipped space and work a puff stitch. I've continued on with this puff stitch pattern, and here I am at the end. So again, you'll need to gauge whether you can work another puff stitch pattern, or if you have just enough space for 2 or 3 double crochets. You will need to end with 1, 2, or 3 double crochets, all depending on your pattern or how much space you have. For the next round, it's chain 2. Then if you've worked double crochets, you'll work double crochets into those double crochets. Then it's skip 2 stitches, a double crochet, go back into the second skip stitch and work your puff stitch. Continue with the stitch pattern to the end of the round. So I've continued on, and I didn't record this part because it's just a repeat of the pattern. I continued after the 2 rounds of puff stitch detail. I worked 2 more rounds of the herringbone double crochet, and that will bring up the length to the same length as that of my back panel. So here I am placing that front panel on top of the back panel, aligning the bottom edge, the sides, and the top edge. And you'll see that my length of the front panel is the same as that of the back panel. You must work those 2 rounds of herringbone double crochet at the top edge as I have done here. So now we need to, you'll work 2 panels, and you'll also leave behind a long enough tail end to help with the seaming if you haven't done that for your back panel. So we need to seam along the top edges to join our shoulders. I've seamed along both shoulders. We now need to mark off the armhole depths for our sleeves. So you place your front panel on top of the back panel, aligning well. And here are the armhole depth measurements for the different sizes. You will use the measurement for the size that you are working on. Remember, you may pause the video to jot down the measurement. These are standard body measurements for the different sizes. From the top edge of your panels, that's the shoulder edge, mark off the armhole depth for the size that you are working. I'm working a medium, so that's 7.5 inches. Make certain to mark off both layers, that's the front panel and the back panel, and you'll do the same on the other side as well. We'll now seam along the sides of the cardigan from the stitch marker going down all the way to that bottom edge. I've seamed along both sides of my cardigan, and here's the armhole spaces left unseamed. Do the same on the other side as well. Here are the sleeve length measurements for the different sizes. Now these are just basic measurements. It's standard sizes. Use the measurement for the size that you are working on. Remember, you may pause the video to jot down the measurement. To work the sleeve, you will begin with a foundation round, just as you had done for the back and front panels. So you'll chain a foundation double crochet that measures the length of the sleeve less 2 inches or 5 centimeters. Remember, we'll be adding a ribbing onto the sleeve. So the pattern is the same. You will work rounds of herringbone double crochet, and then you work your puff stitch detail and just 2 rounds of herringbone double crochet in between the puff stitch detail, as I have done here. Now you'll see that my puff stitch detail isn't exactly in the center of that sleeve, and that's fine because I am going to join the ends of the sleeve to form a cylinder and align the puff stitch detail to my shoulder, to the puff stitch detail along the shoulder. So the best way for me to show you, to explain, is to actually show it to you. And here it is. The width of the sleeve must be twice the armhole depth for the size that you are working. So mine was 7.5 inches. That means I worked my sleeve to 15 inches in width. Now that I've got 2 panels for my sleeve, I went ahead and seamed both sides or edges of the panels to form this cylinder-like sleeve, as you see here. We'll now fit the sleeve into the armhole space. I've already done one side, so I'll show you how to go about it for the other sleeve. Into that armhole space, fit the sleeve as I am doing here. Make certain to align these puff stitch detail pattern on both the shoulder and the sleeve. So that's the important part here, because you want that pattern to run all the way down the sleeve. So I went ahead and used the solid color to attach my sleeve, and that's because I didn't want the yarn to stick out. I wanted it to blend in. Use the color that would blend in the most, because you really don't want to see this seam or join. So go ahead and seam along the sleeve, aligning the puff stitch detail well. I've joined my sleeves to the armhole spaces. We'll now form the ribbing along the front edge of the cardigan. Right at that bottom edge along the front opening, attach yarn. Remember to use the smaller hook, which is the 4mm hook, for all your ribbings. Chain 2. Here we're working double crochets into all stitches all along this front opening of the cardigan. I've worked round 1 of the ribbing, those double crochets all along the front opening. Now, when you get to the neckline at that top edge, you may see that you will see that there's no stitches to work into. You'll work your stitches evenly spaced into the little gaps along that top edge. Continuing on with round 2 of the ribbing. So here we're working front post double crochets alternating with back post double crochets. To begin, it's chain 2 and turn. So it's 2 front post double crochets and then it's 2 back post double crochets into the next stitch, or the post of the next stitch, and this is the post of the stitch. Work a front post double crochet. So that's yarn over, insert your hook into the post of the stitch going from the front, pull up a loop. You have 3 loops on your hook, yarn over, go through 2 loops on the hook, yarn over, go through 2 loops on the hook. So that was the first front post double crochet, and here's the second front post double crochet. So that was 2 front post double crochets, and we'll alternate with 2 back post double crochets. To work a back post double crochet, yarn over, insert your hook into the post of the stitch going from behind, pull up a loop. You have 3 loops on your hook, yarn over, go through 2 loops on the hook, yarn over, go through 2 loops on the hook. That was the first back post double crochet, and now for the second. Continue on working 2 front post double crochets, alternating with 2 back post double crochets to the end of the round. I've continued on to complete round 2. I worked 2 front post double crochets and alternated with 2 back post double crochets. Right at the end of the round, I finished off with a double crochet into my last stitch. Then round 3, chain 2 and turn. So here again we're working front post double crochets alternating with 2 back post double crochets, but you'll see that what was a front post double crochet in the round before becomes a back post double crochet in this round, as you see here. So we will work according to what we see. Now if I turn to this side, I see here this looks like a front post double crochet, so I'll work front post double crochets into all front post double crochets and back post double crochets into all back post double crochets. So here I am starting with 2 back post double crochets, and then it's 2 front post double crochets. Continue to the end of the round. I've continued on with the ribbing. All I've done was repeat round 3 until I had the width of my ribbing, and I was happy with that. So this width of my ribbing measures around 3 inches. So you'll work as many rounds as need be to get to the width of ribbing that you're looking to work. I've gone ahead and worked one of the ribbings on the sleeve as well, just to give you an idea here. So it's quite different from the ribbing along the front opening. You'll see that I've tapered off on the ribbing, and I'll show you on the second sleeve exactly how I went about that. So on that sleeve, attach yarn to the sleeve. Then it's chain 2. Now, there are no stitches to work into. You'll need to work all your stitches into the little spaces along this edge of the sleeve. So for our first round, we're working double crochets all around the sleeve edge. I've continued on with round 1. We're working in the round here. So to end this round, you need to slip stitch into the second chain from chain 2. Round 2, chain 2. Now, in order to taper off the sleeve, we need to work decreases. So I'll be working my decreases when I'm working those front post double crochets for the ribbing. So all along the sleeve, and this all depends on how much you'd like to taper off the sleeve. As you see here, the sleeve on the side is tapered off, and that is brought about by the decreases that I worked into the front post double crochets. Continuing on, we've chained 2. Now we're working 2 front post double crochets alternating with 2 back post double crochets. At the same time, we'll work our decreases. To work a decrease, you'll work your front post double crochet into 2 posts, as I'm doing here. So that's yarn over, insert your hook going into 2 posts. pull up a loop, yarn over, go through 2 loops on the hook, yarn over, go through 2 loops on the hook. You may work your decreases as need be. Remember that the more decreases you work, the tighter the ribbing of the sleeve. And then it's 2 back post double crochets. And again, the pattern is the same as with the front ribbing, where we're alternating between the 2 stitches. So I'm working a decrease into every second front post double crochet. But like I said, decide on how you'd like it. If it's getting too tight, you feel that the ribbing is too tight, you may work it into every third front post double crochet. Ultimately, this ribbing must be able to fit the hand. I've continued on working those 2 front post double crochets, alternating with 2 back post double crochets, and I worked the decreases as well to end the round into the second chain from chain 2, slip stitch to join. Round 3, chain 2. So this time we aren't turning, so you'll work front post double crochets into all front post double crochets and back post double crochets into all back post double crochets. Remember that you cannot work any decreases in this round in order to get your stitch pattern. I've continued on, and all I've done was repeat round 3 until I had the length of ribbing that I was looking for. So you'll work the same ribbing on the other sleeve. Now for the bottom of the cardigan, it's just the same as we had worked for the opening of the cardigan. I attached my yarn at the bottom edge of the cardigan, and then I worked a round of double crochets all along that bottom edge. Then it was round 2 where I had worked chain 2, turn, and then it was the 2 front post double crochets alternated with the 2 back post double crochets, and I repeated that round until I had the length of ribbing that I was looking for. You can now fasten off, and we cut off the excess yarn and weave in all these ends. So with your yarn needle, you weave in these ends going back and forth into the stitches on the wrong side of the cardigan. Do the same to weave in all the other ends. We'll now fit on pockets. So to fit on the pockets, you'll firstly need to decide on the placement of the pocket, and then you can work the pocket. Now for my pocket, I worked it using 20 stitches. And then again, I just repeated the herringbone double crochet pattern throughout, and I worked the puff stitch pattern in between. And that's only because I need my pattern to sort of blend into the cardigan, as you see here. So the first thing you'll do is decide on the placement, and then you can see how you go about working this pocket. So as I said, I worked my pocket using 20 stitches, and you can make it to any depth that you'd like to. The more stitches you use, the deeper the pocket. So you'll work your pattern as I have done here, and then once you've got your pattern to the right width, you can go ahead and seam along the 3 edges of your pocket. Now you see that I've worked it in such a way that I have the puff stitch pattern in between, so it all lines up with the cardigan itself. It sort of blends into the cardigan. Once you've got your pocket, again, the placement is quite important. Make sure that you've got that right. The only way to get it is to actually fit on the cardigan and see where you'd like the pocket. Then you can go ahead and seam the pocket onto the cardigan along the 3 sides, leaving the top edge open or unseamed. Here's the pocket all seamed along the 3 edges. So that does it for this tutorial. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it.